Welcome to another interview here on The Jono Show. Today, we interview entrepreneur, sales expert, and podcast host Andy Paul. All right, what's up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us here on The Jono Show. I am so excited to be joined by my guest today, being on the other side of the mic.
For a
Andy
change,
Paul.
yes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So you have an impressive over 800 episodes. How many episodes exactly have you
Force me to look it up. As of today, probably 864. I could tell you exactly, but that's close enough.
That is amazing. So many people, you say, oh, I have a podcast, and you go check it out, and they have
870, excuse me. Gosh, I wasn't giving myself enough credit.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounded a little bit low. I have been consuming your content so much. I dug back. I listened to your episodes with Keenan. A favorite of mine. I thought it was brilliant what you did with the little competition that you had between the sales books. I thought that was extremely apropos. But I want to get into your story here.
Sure.
Set the stage a little bit for the audience. Who are you and what do you do? It's broad and it's meant to be that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, it's a little narrower today, but yeah, gosh, I've been in sales my entire career, which has been a long time, and 44 years this year. So yeah, I spent my early career in tech sales, did a number of startups in the Valley and in Southern California, growing sales teams, VP of sales. Last company I worked for before I started my own company is a company called Viasat, not too far from where you are. At that time when I joined them, it was just a few handful of people and a couple $1 million in revenue. Now they're a multi-billion-dollar organization. But I worked for them, helped take the company public, and then in 2000 started my own company. The focus was really to help. One of the things that had sort of been my specialty working through startups was how do you help small companies with no track record, no brand name, sell big, expensive systems, competing against really big brand name companies. And so I started my own company, sort of consult with small companies to help them learn how to compete on a bigger stage.
So
go ahead.
So I was going to say, how does that transition? So what do you do? What is that product service?
So I was doing a lot of consulting with the companies, and yeah, let's say half the consulting was really doing sort of fractional VP work. So, but interesting is that's sort of the easy way to define it, but it's really more of an advisor to the CEO for sales. But I had one client, I ran their sales for 2 days a week for 4 years. We doubled the size of the company and sold it for a bunch of money. So yeah, typically we're sort of longer term engagements, working hand in hand with the CEO, oftentimes to position the company for sale.
Okay.
And doing it, 1, 2 day a week, 2 days a month type thing was a lot of fun.
How did you get your start in sales?
Well, I graduated college with no idea what I wanted to do. And so I had no discernible job skills when I graduated college with a history degree. And I guess after I sort of had a choice. I could go to work for the university, my alma mater, where I worked after graduating for a little bit, or
and where was that?
At Stanford.
Oh, okay.
And my parents sort of encouraged me to be more aggressive in my job search. But working for universities, with access to all the facilities and so on, it was sort of attractive at that time. But as I went to job placement center on campus, and gosh, it seemed like most of the things people were there for sales jobs, big companies at that time. This was before tech as we know it existed in the Valley. That there was no Apple yet, all these things. So I got a job for a big company called Burroughs. That's now called Unisys. That it's part of a training program. They had 8 weeks of sales training my first year on the job. They scooped up thousands, like IBM and Xerox and everything. They scooped up thousands of fresh college grads and put them through these training programs with the express intent that the cream would rise to the top and everybody else would go continue their careers elsewhere. And yeah, turned out to be sort of fun. I had no expectation that I would enjoy sales at all. And once I sort of got used to it, and yeah, rose into management pretty quickly. And then after been doing it for about 4 years, I was I was going with one of my salespeople to close this big deal. Now, today's dollars, probably like a $250,000 deal. We were selling a computer system for accounting purposes to a large tire distributor in the Bay Area. And I was working in the Bay Area at that time, and we get down. I talked to the CEO of the company the night before just to confirm that we're all set to sign the deal. Absolutely, we're all set. And we show up, and the guy says, "Look, we're not going to be able to sign the deal." And my salesperson is crestfallen, and I'm a little surprised because I talked to this guy myself. And he said, "Well, he turned around and looked at the credenza behind his desk, and there was an Apple II sitting there." He said, "I went to the computer store last night, and they said this thing can do everything that your big expensive system can do for $2,000, which was absolutely untrue, but at that time. But there was no dissuading him. And I literally left that meeting and called a good friend of mine who had worked with at Burroughs, who had gone and gotten his MBA at Stanford and then gone to work for Apple. And I said, "Can I get a job?" So yeah, I went from there then to working at Apple in the early days of Apple, back in the early 81, I guess I started. End of 81, I started at Apple. So yeah, that's sort of the start of my adventure in startup world. And even though Apple was beyond a startup at that point, but there's still $125 million a year business when I started.
Wow, that's incredible. So this is,
Yeah.
it must be very interesting for you to kind of see where they've come. I wanted to go back to
Sure.
that first sales job that you talked about and that training. I am fascinated what makes up an incredible salesperson, and going through those different interviews that you held on your podcast. And for anyone listening right now, you absolutely must check out Sales Enablement.
Thank you.
There's just so much quality content there, whether you're a business owner, whether you are just brand new to business and you think you want to run a company. The lessons that you can learn there, not only from Andy, but the guests he has on are really incredible. I actually bought one of your guest books, Chris. Oh my gosh, the gentleman's name's escaping me right now. It's about hiring better salespeople.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm blanking too.
name escapes me, but in any case, just
we'll put it in the show notes.
There we go. Exactly. It will be in the show notes. But what do you see as the main differences? If you've worked with sales companies or worked in sales capacities over the years, working with these CEOs, what are you seeing? Are you seeing major differences between sales training that they had back then and sales training now? And of course, trying to equalize a little bit with a massive progression of technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, the technology hasn't helped. I mean, it's not made salespeople better. I mean, that's unfortunately, we just haven't learned how to use it to that purpose yet. But yeah, I think the common thread throughout generations, if you will, of sellers and so on, is those who tend to rise to the top, who are more consistently good at what they're doing. Those who are, innately curious, insatiably curious, that want to learn, that want to understand. I mean, more so than learning, it's really understanding, I think, is really a key thing. I was very fortunate. My first job, I was selling computer systems to small and mid-sized businesses. Yeah, maybe the biggest business was $200 million a year type thing. But for accounting systems, so general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, billing, job cost accounting. I worked a lot with big construction companies. And I had this chance my customers were CEOs oftentimes and entrepreneurs that started the business, and just to sit and talk with them about their business, right? And understand their needs, their requirements. And then I had taken accounting at college, so I was pretty familiar with the packages we were selling, what they did, but just having that interaction, it was, as like I say, that was my business degree. And there are people who pass through that experience without absorbing the same amount, though. And I think that's the distinction is those people go into these experiences, have these experiences, look at them as a way to learn and improve in some degree. Now, it's interesting. I was saw this quote from Nelson Mandela this morning. It was one I had written down a couple of years ago, and I was going through my Evernote file and I came across it. And the quote was, I never lose. I win or I learn. And I think that's really the perspective that distinguishes the consistently good performers in sales is, yeah, can't win every deal, but when you do, you learn something that you add that becomes sort of this base of your acumen that you then apply to future deals. And yeah, more than anything, I think that's really it. There's no, hey, I'm a outgoing personality, or I'm really good at presentations, or it's much more fundamental than that. And because there are salespeople with all sorts of personality types that succeed. But the common thread for me is always this curiosity, this inquisitiveness, this drive to understand. And that, as I said, that builds your base of acumen.
That seems very different than, kind of this highly maybe romanticized version of a salesperson that we see on TV, someone like Jordan Belfort, shall we, in The Wolf of Wall Street, or something like that, where it's this high pressure, intense, in your face type of environment. I know certainly Grant Cardone and certainly other people as well. I mean, it's all about being powerful in their face, pushing them to a decision.
Let's be clear. I mean, Grant Cardone made his money through his investments, right? I mean, there's a book that came out last year, 2020, written by a guy named Jonah Berger, who's a professor at Wharton. And I interviewed him for my show that went out in August. A book called The Catalyst: How to Change People's Minds. And I thought it was a really excellent book. And one of the things that he writes about in there is that we know through research that basically everybody in the world hates to be sold to, or hates, they have a natural resistance to being persuaded. He called it persuasion reactance. Everybody has it. And so, as I've written before, I said, I find it ironic that we spend billions of dollars a year to train salespeople how to master this one attribute, persuasion, that 100% of the world universally resist and hate. And that sort of sums up where we are in sales. Well, I said it's just, and yet we still haven't, after all these years, really sort of, for the most part, when I say we, the broader sales community, cottoned onto the fact that it's counterproductive. Yeah, I mean, there are always going to be people who are the exceptions, right? I mean, Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, whatever, you get these boiler room operations, and people get intimidated, they get confused, as was really clear as you went through Wolf of Wall Street. They're preying on people that for the most part were unsophisticated. I mean, that's not B2B sales as we practice it. And there's those that are high pressure, and you're trying to sell to a serious corporation. It's not like Jordan Belfort was selling investments to Mobil Oil, right?
He's selling penny stocks or whatever.
Penny stocks to people who didn't know any better. And somehow it's like we celebrate that as a great accomplishment. Mm-hmm. I mean, his biggest accomplishment has been selling himself after spending time being convicted of a crime. Yeah. So, more power to him for that. But I don't see him as a model by any stretch of imagination.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, as a member of the sales community and as someone who runs multiple businesses, do you, what does it for you being sold to? Because you doubtless have seen all the tactics, you've been through the trainings, you understand the trainings. Do you kind of see what's coming before it's coming, and there's a terrible sales presentation happening? Sure. Are you jaded? How does that, if someone's wanting to sell you?
If someone's good, it stands out. I mean, so someone that really takes the time to listen stands out. But it sort of depends on the environment. Like, we purchased a car last year, or we leased a car, and it was the second time we had dealt with a salesperson, and he was very user-friendly. He was nice. He was buying a car. We knew what we wanted. We showed up wanting to buy that specific car, right? So he didn't have a lot of work to do, but he made sure the rest of the experience was good, right? And so I give him a lot of credit for that because he was very professional. And so I came back the second time. I said, look, first time we leased a car, we were in the dealership for like 3 hours. I said, so I want to release it again, but I don't want us to be more than 45 minutes on site. So if you can make that happen, we're good. He said, okay, I can make that happen. And we were close. I think we were like 50 minutes, but yeah, he didn't have, he was, yeah, he was selling me the car, but he wasn't really selling me the car. We're just getting a new lease on the exact same car we had before, the latest model, but he made the experience really good. And so I think this idea that's so dramatically underestimated, which is how the customer feels about the experience of working with you, is so decisive. And there's been multiple studies, including the Challenger sale, that said 53%. I know, very precise number, which I'm sure isn't true, but 53% of the buyer's decision is based on their experience of going through the process. And there's actually other research, Daniel Kahneman has done with his whole research on what he called peak end experiences, that says that when people go through an experience, they basically make their decision about it and form their judgment about it based on two things. One is the peak event during that, and peak event defined as experiential, and the last contact they had. So you put that in a sales term, is your decision is really, your purchase decision is really oftentimes guided by how you experience the selling, not necessarily what someone said per se that was persuasive or convincing. It's the person.
I love that you brought up the experience. Service is something I'm so passionate about. It's something that I built my first company on, certainly elements of my second company. The first company was pure service. It was
Right.
staffing,
Yeah.
and we had to compete in an environment that was increasingly dominated by tech platforms that are notorious for, terrible service.
Yes.
In an industry where you have to have service is the game, service is the product. When you think about service, though, do you feel like the product almost doesn't matter? Because in today's information loaded environment, we can get a lot of the information right on our phones very, very quickly. But it's more of the experience that we have, like whether it's an Android, an iPhone. Does it really matter? Do you think the service is really the only thing left the brand has?
Well, it's a large component of it, but I mean, let's keep it sort of the business to business context. Is I'm always amused when I read surveys, of which there have been multiple surveys just coming out because of the pandemic and everything going remote, is saying, oh, salespeople beware, this current generation of millennial and Gen Z buyers, they're happy doing everything remote. They don't want to talk to salespeople. And I'm sitting there going, there's never been a buyer in the face of the planet over the history of mankind that wanted to talk to a salesperson. This is nothing new, right? Let's just get over this whole idea that somehow this is a change, right? As long as I've sold, at heart, the customer didn't want to talk to salespeople. Question becomes, why do they? They do because they reach a point where they have to, right? I mean, if you can do it, make your purchase decision on, let's say, a complex, business product without ever talking to a salesperson, great. But when the customer does need to talk to you, or does reach out and is open to talking, it's because they need to, right? They need some deeper level of understanding about some aspect of what it is they're trying to purchase, whether it's defining the problem more thoroughly or really understanding the alternatives or what have you, is then they need to engage with a person, a human seller. And the experience of that, I think, is oftentimes decisive. If you think about it, when you're meeting a customer for the first time, a prospective customer, they're asking you a question. Now, they don't say this question out loud, oftentimes, but the question is, why you? And not you, the company, but you, the person. Why should I listen to you? Why should I invest my time in you? Why should I trust what you say? Why should I believe you? Why you? And I mean, if you don't have a good answer for that, through your actions, you're not transparent about your motivations or whatever aspect of it we want to talk about, you're not going to get the deal, because that experience is about you. So if you're having an initial conversation with a prospect, just to keep in mind, they are asking this question of them silently for the most part. I've had people ask me out loud, but they're asking it. And it's all about you, the person, not you, the company or the product you're representing.
Mm. In B2B relationships specifically,
Hmm?
as you definitely have had so much experience in that realm. For those B2B relationships, are they typically longer cycle?
You mean building the connection with the customer?
Building the relationship. I mean, for any of those the enterprise softwares that you've
Mhm.
sold, for any of the different things, are they typically longer cycle, or are the purchase decisions able to be made fairly quickly?
Yeah, see, I look at it completely differently.
Okay.
And so I believe, and this is nothing I came to up front, it's through experience I came to this realization is that if you want to really understand how effective you are as a seller, it's not the duration of time that it takes to bring a customer from initial point of contact to an order. It's the quantity of time that you spend. So, how many hours are you investing over the length of the buying process? We'll call it the buying journey to bring that customer from initial point of interest, build the connection, build your credibility, build trust, and so on to get them to the point where they make a decision. And so, I found over time is that oftentimes sellers are too focused on duration and insert too much time between the various interactions they have with buyers, and that actually buyers want to move generally more quickly than sellers do. And that's going to be surprising to most people because I think no, buyers are slow. And actually, I think more often the problem is with sellers. And so I was just hearing a story the other day about VP of sales was complaining to me. But yeah, my reps go out and they have one meeting with the buyer, and then they'll say, "Okay, let's make the appointment for 2 weeks from today." That's like, well, why not 2 days from now? Right? I mean, what you gave them was maybe a piece of content that's going to take them 20 minutes to read and absorb. Why are you waiting? And it's just sort of this misunderstanding of what buyers are trying to accomplish when they set out to buy is they don't want to spend as much time as possible to make a decision. They want to spend as little time, right? They want to quickly gather the information and make sense of the information they've gathered to make a good decision within the least period of time with the smallest investment of time and resources possible.
Mhm.
Because they've got other things to do. Buying your product is just a very, very, very tiny fraction of what that company does. So they don't want to make it a bigger thing that needs to be. And so, people make a good enough decision. Yeah. And this is where this, compressing the quantity of time into a smaller duration really becomes important because if you look at the way people make decisions, that fundamentally people make what's called a good enough decision. This is research that came out of Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon, wrote about this back in the 50s and later, where he said people basically fall into two types of decision makers. They are satisficers or maximizers. And if you're a satisficer, you make decisions that satisfy your requirements and are sufficient or suffice to achieve your goals. So they combine the word satisfice. And that's the good enough decision. So most companies, when they're out looking to buy a product, they'll look until they meet a product that they're convinced satisfies their requirements and will enable them as sufficient or will suffice for them to hit their desired business outcomes. And then they stop. So, if you're trying to be leisurely as a salesperson, that's a problem. So, for me, one of the critical things as part of an experiential thing, in addition to sort of the personal connection, is your responsiveness, right? I mean, how not just speed, but how quickly are you able to um, provide complete answers, right? I mean, for me to be responsive means is somebody asks me a question and I answer it, but I don't really answer the question, right? Then I wasn't being responsive. So, the ability to be responsive and be quickly responsive. So to provide complete answers to help the customer truly understand what they're trying to do, then you start compressing that time frame because hey, they got something else they want to do.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Or are you
Sure.
talking about actually, um, just in a very practical sense, responding to emails quicker?
Well, that's part of it, right? I mean, so I'll give you an example. So I had a client at one point that was primarily inside sales driven and had a really good inbound lead flow. And So the CEO had invited me in because he was a serial entrepreneur and had been successful with his 2 previous companies. And this one was doing okay, but slowed down quite a bit. And so I went through their process and looked at it and said, well, part of the problem is they're getting these leads, but they're not responding to them quickly. And so that's one element of responsiveness is being quick, but the other part is having complete information for the buyer. So I said, well, so let's do this. Let's switch up the inside sales team. And we brought people over from the engineering side of the house that had great product knowledge and great knowledge about how customers use the product and made them frontline sellers. And they would respond to the leads coming in. And I said, so right now, when I first got there, you're spending, I don't know, it took 3 days on average, I think, to follow up on leads. And I said, so what we're going to do is change that. And over time, we worked the process. So we got to the point where every lead got followed up, inbound lead got followed up within 30 minutes.
Wow.
So it got followed up within 30 minutes by someone who knew what the hell they were talking about. And these were this is a very technical product. It's a test equipment product. It had a software and a hardware component. And what they found is by just getting back to someone so quickly is, first of all, they attracted their interest, right? Wow. Yeah, we oftentimes managed to get into competitors' installed base because the competitors wouldn't respond to inquiries from their own customers in rapid time. But yeah, so they'd have this conversation very quickly. People tend to pick up the phone more quickly if they see it's coming from somebody that they just sent an email to. And they'd have somebody talking to them that knew exactly what they're talking about, so they could get into discovery mode really quickly at a detailed level. And invariably, what we found after 30 minutes is the prospect would say, well, geez, I'd love to schedule a demo of the software. And what I trained the salespeople to do is to say, no. And the customer was like that. And they said, but we can do it right now. Let's just power up, go to meeting. We'll take care of this right now. And so at the end of an hour, they had basically compressed 3 steps of the selling process into an hour. And yet the competitors were still going to respond in a day or two.
And then set up the course for a week.
Yeah. And then at the end of the demo, what we'd offer is we'll send you a test unit, because this is a test equipment platform. They all had routines that they were running on their existing test equipment, so they could immediately test whether it would run on ours. So within less than 48 hours, the customer had a demo and had a trial unit in hand that they had loaded their software on, had our customer success people primed. They would call the customer as soon as they got notification from FedEx that the box had been delivered. And so you start thinking this experience, right? Holy cow, but what they said was, oh, well, yeah, this product meets my requirements. I understand what it does. They understand what it does. It's going to help me achieve my desired outcomes with this investment. I don't need to talk to anybody else. I'm done. And that's the point you want to get to, is right? Because they're not looking for the best solution. They're looking for something that gets done what they need done. And then what's their incentive to keep looking? So we called that taking prospects off the street. That was our goal. We want to take that prospect off the street and put it in our camp. Yeah, works like a charm.
Do you believe that the industry matters in this sense?
In terms of?
So the industry that we're in, the wedding and events space, that is, one of the companies. I actually love that you said the speed component, by the way, because that's one of our competitive advantages. We'll have someone inquire and our team gets back to them within 15 to 20 to 30 minutes.
Yep.
It's textable. So everyone's on their phones, they send the text link in, and if they get a response that fast and we're setting up a tour and we're already in there, our competitors will sometimes take a week to
They're
get
gone.
back. And they've booked, they've done 6 tours by that point. So
You've got them.
That's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I had a client who was a large nationwide installer of residential solar systems at houses, and we did the exact same thing. Is we knew if we could get in there quickly, be incredibly responsive, do the home visit, which was required, the site survey quickly, yeah, they'd have no incentive to talk to anybody else, and especially if you have good social proof and the references that they can look at online and so on. Yeah, they'll write you a big check right away.
So to that question, do you think the industry matters when you have something like a very emotionally driven purchase? Your clients, those tech clients, and again, this is more B2B, this is more B2C rather than
Yeah.
B2B. Those clients are making decisions based on needs that they have defined. It doesn't matter if it's green or purple or yellow.
Yeah. It's all emotional. Right. I mean, it's this idea that you matter as an individual, that their experience with you matters. That's not logical. That's emotional, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, the research seems pretty clear that in a clearly sort of clinical sense, that decisions driven by emotions, but people do rationalize them with the logic. But yeah, I mean, I think emotions really drive B2B, B2C. I think it drives everything. So I mean, if you think about it from a business standpoint, and again, this is based on research people have done, is when, if you're a stakeholder at a company that's making a decision, let's say you're part of a buying committee of 5 people, and you're making a decision on a new piece of business software, a machine tool or something, whatever, doesn't really matter, is that everyone looks at that decision through 2 lenses. First lens is, what's the best solution for the company? The second lens is, what's the best solution for me? Right? What's the best outcome for me with this decision?
Powerful.
And so you have to be aware of that as a salesperson, because it's the personal part that really drives the decision ultimately. I think is, there's a lot of logic behind, this makes the best sense for the company, but hey, my job may change as a result of this. I'm not sure. That person's got a different input into the buying committee than what the logic would dictate.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be sensitive to that. And you have to ask those questions. You have to understand their perspective, their point of view about what it means for them. So as you go through your discovery, maybe not all in the first call, but after you've deepened your connection with the individual, you built some trust and credibility, then you start getting into those questions about, well, what's this mean for you? What will the impact be on you personally when you make this decision?
How would you recommend someone build that rapport on a personal level? Because when you get in a discovery call, you're maybe describing the product, or maybe that's already been done. You're just trying to build rapport with the person. Have you found professional ways to kind of go personal quickly?
Just to be curious and interested in the other person. I was thinking about this the other day. Is 'cause, I'm sort of a contrarian on some things. Is I'd been reading something the last couple of weeks about small talk, right? And so there is this move, not a huge movement, but people are trying to talk about it in the B2B world. People are busy; they don't have time for small talk. Well, it's just plain BS, because again, it's just science has shown it to be true. There was a study a couple of years ago, I forget where it was on top of my head, but shows that this is just a fundamental element of breaking the ice and finding common ground with someone that you just met in order to build a connection, a relationship. So small talk is very important. So where's the small talk come from? Well, it comes from you as a seller, is demonstrating a level of sincere interest in the person. And so I was going to give you an example. Is one of the most disparaged bits of small talk that people talk about is somebody say, well, how's the weather? Right? The famous weather question. Never ask the weather question. And I'd say, well, actually, that's been one of my most effective openers throughout my entire career. But I don't ask about how's the weather. I'll know where the person is located I'm talking to. Let's say they're having a big snowstorm. I'll say, wow, snow day out there today? How is that with your kids? It's about them. It's not about the weather, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll say something like, gosh, I remember when I grew up in Wisconsin, I love snow days. What'd you do in your snow days when you were a kid? Suddenly we're talking. Well, yeah, it's the weather question, but it's not the weather question. It's a question about them.
Yeah.
And that's really where the focus needs to be, is what's of interest to this person? What can you find on LinkedIn, Facebook, Insta, or wherever about this person that you can use as sort of an opener? Say, how do we find some common ground about something to talk about? And that's what the small talk's for. How do I find a common patch? And good salespeople know how to do that, and intuitively know how to do it after perhaps being taught. But it's easy, and it just takes a little effort. And That's the part that drives me nuts when I hear sellers not do it. I'm listening to recorded calls with sales teams, and they're not doing that because all the tools are at your disposal.
Mhm. I want to get to tools because I heard you say that the increase in technology and the technical tools that people are using are not necessarily haven't made things better.
No.
Tell me though what, and so I have to ask that in context. You said you were a contrarian. Of course, I have to ask that in context of Bring DNA.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but you think about it. We have embraced sales technologies, email automation, dialers for outbound calling, and so on, among others. In order to sort of break through the digital clutter that's out there, it makes it hard to reach a prospect. But what created the digital clutter? All the tools we use to do automated emails and outbound calling and so on. So we're basically creating tools to solve a problem that we largely created. So yeah, that was sort of one of the points about technology not making us better. But the other is that we again in the sales community, mostly in the B2B space, but certainly in some B2C as well, is we've used the technology to automate existing behaviors that weren't good. And so if you just add the veneer of technology onto a sales processes that are fundamentally flawed, you still have fundamentally flawed sales processes. You're just doing more of them. And that doesn't help either. So yeah, I tend to look at things from a perspective of productivity. And for me, productivity in sales is a very specific definition, which is how many dollars of revenue are you producing per hour of actual selling time, meaning selling time that you're engaged with the buyer. And even though there's no hard data out there about this, I'm willing to bet that, and I see no evidence to the contrary, that individual sales productivity in terms of dollars of revenue per hour generated is no greater now than it was 40 years ago. And arguably, I have talked to one person who arguably made the case that it was actually less.
Just because there's more stuff happening.
Well,
to manage.
They're just doing the same things. We just use technology to do it or to help with it. And that's okay. But what's gone along with the embrace of sales technology is sort of conceit that this is the modern way of selling. And for me, modern means that it's an improvement over what was done before. And yeah, I don't believe that we'll ever find data, at least so far to date, that what's being done today in what we call modern sales is more productive than what was done 20, 40 years ago. So it's not worse necessarily, but it's not better, right? So the point about using technology is to make it better. And this is, I think, is the gap that's going to be filled, hopefully, in some cases, using AI-driven tools and so on to help the human become more productive and more effective in the time that they're actually interacting with the buyer, so they can, consume fewer hours in aggregate to get somebody from initial point of interest to a sale, which then would give them more time to sell more prospects.
In your work with the different companies you've served, let's say in the past 5 years, have you seen some tools really shine that for you are kind of some of those improvements that help, push the sales process along, shorten the time, and don't encourage those bad behaviors that you talked about?
Well, I think there's some tools that help put sellers in position to do that, right? By helping them get better. And RingDNA is a great example with their conversational AI product, which is, hey, we're going to record the calls, assuming we're in a two-party recording situation, record the calls with the customers, and then use AI to analyze the call in terms of various metrics that we're looking at, whether it's relative talk time of the parties or if it's the usage of certain keywords at certain times within the call. In some cases, we know it's the duration of the call that's really important, like first calls to set up a subsequent demo. We've determined an optimal length for those based on the data. And now
what is that?
Well, we found it's less than 3 minutes.
Okay. So fairly brief conversation.
Yeah. And the people making those calls are the entry level sellers, the sales development reps, and yeah, you want them to be able to make that human connection initially, and then ask a couple quick questions that will say, hey, this would be a good fit. Would you take a meeting? But then we're also rolling out a next enhancement to that product as part of our platform overall, which is, we call it Yoda AI. And what Yoda AI does is, as you're talking with a customer and it's listening to the call, and perhaps the customer raises the name of a competitor, well, Yoda will hear that and I'll pop up on your screen, hey, here's the battle card we use for talking about competitor XYZ. Or it could be listening to the call and thinking, well, you're dominating the conversation and you're selling. Hey, why don't you be quiet, right? You can customize these, but hey, why don't you shut up and let the customer talk? Or hey, you just asked a series of really interesting questions. Now we want to make sure we can confirm our understanding. So ask a reflection question, right? My understanding is this is what we talked about. This is what I heard. Is that correct? So it's going to give that real-time advice based on what's happening. And the good rep is going to be paying attention and learning from that. And so they wouldn't be getting those same suggestions, after 3 calls. It's like, oh yeah, now I know this is what I should be doing. Or I've been looking, I've got 5 minutes, I've been talking too much. Let me stop and let them talk.
Andy,
so
that's
go ahead.
Brilliant. No, I was going to say, Andy, that's brilliant. And this is what Ring DNA does, or this is Yoda AI.
Well, it's part of the Ring DNA platform. Yeah. We just announced it. Yeah.
Got it. Wow. This is incredible. So it would give you basically predictive, like, suggestions, real-time suggestions after analyzing these different metrics that you discussed, of a guided conversation that would.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's listening, right? And in real time, and what it's doing is, there've been millions of calls made on our platform. And so it's taking the intelligence from those millions of calls and the outcomes of the calls and so on, and making a suggestion as to what, if something's, obvious, what should the seller do at that point in time? So it's then also becomes a real reinforcement tool for training, because the big drawback of sales training is not necessarily what you're being taught, but it's that you're taught and then it's never reinforced, or it's left up to the manager to reinforce it. But what if the manager could then, through Yoda AI, put in the suggestions to reinforce the training? Then it sticks. So, and all these notifications so it can be customized per seller. So if they've got specific things going on. So from a manager standpoint, I can use the recordings themselves of previous calls to annotate those and have some really great one-on-one coaching with the seller. But now you can sort of extend that actually into the call itself. So, if you're a manager, it's almost like saying, if I could listen in on every single phone call my reps are making. And this is sort of a way to do that.
That sounds incredibly complex, and in a very good way. And I feel like for a B2B company, they could absolutely use something like this at scale. Do you have, are there any plans to do something for more of a B2C application?
Well, there are some customers of Ring DNA. They're sort of B2C, call center operations and so on. So, but I mean, if you're making a call to a customer, I don't think it cares whether you're B2B or B2C.
Got it. So it's just analyzing the discussion, the human elements there. Well, this is a perfect segment into some of the questions about the podcast that I had, but I'm realizing I could probably sit here with you for 3 hours and ask you way more questions about sales, because I'm fascinated. I think there's so much value here that you're providing, but I do want to ask a couple of questions about the podcast. And you talked about listening, talked about asking these questions kind of as you discuss this program.
Right.
As I listen to your podcast episodes with each one of your guests, I noticed that you asked, of course, open-ended questions, but you took your time to allow the guest to really unpack a thought. And so I'm curious, I've been obsessed. I want to be a good interviewer. And so I've been recently obsessed, with understanding how great interviewers ask questions, from Larry King to even someone kind of maybe different, someone like, my gosh, my mind just went completely blank. The gentleman, the Joe Rogan show, of course. Yeah. Where it's more conversational and he's weaving kind of a story throughout. What are some things that you look for in the conversation? Do you go in with a plan? How do you craft your interview to be really, really impactful to get that juice that you want from the guest?
So several things. One is I do my research. If they're an author and they're coming to talk about the book, I read the book. I'm a little different than most, at least in the sales world, and I imagine a lot of the business podcasts I don't take questions from guests. So oftentimes the guests come prepared. Here's my one sheet. Here are the 10 questions I want to talk about. Yeah, I don't care about that. It's about what I want to talk about, what I'm interested in. And so, I'll read the book, I'll do research on them. And then, I come up with sort of a storyline of what I'm interested in talking about, what I think people would be interested in hearing about. And I write out, I don't know, it depends, 35, 50 questions, something like that. Because we rarely, in the course of a conversation, I have a lot of conversations, we never touch on anything I prepare. We just open and off it goes. Or alternatively, I'll get to maybe a quarter of them, half of them max. So, and that's fine, because when I started, my greatest fear was, what if I had nothing to say? And so I maybe started off from a position of over preparing, but I found over time that's really useful for me, because then I do my research. I do sort of a rough draft of the questions that I want and the order I think they should come in. And then usually the morning of the interviews, and I record all my interviews on one day during the week, I'll go back through it and actually put it into final form. And so it's fresh in my mind before I start the conversation. And and part of it then boils down to what I view my role is. And so, I do believe I'm there to help them tell a story. But by the same token, I got some advice early on when I started my podcast from, I forget who it was from actually, but he was an expert on public speaking. And I had done, I don't know if I actually hired him as a consultant or he was just giving me some free advice, but he said, after he'd listened to like the first 10 episodes, he says, just remember, you're the star of the show, not the guests. He said, it's Jimmy Kimmel Live. It's not guests live. And people tune in to hear them. And that was really important advice to get, because it helped me over time develop the style where, I'm very respectful of my guests, but I don't feel the need to agree with them. I insert my own opinions, and I think that's part of the story we tell. I feel very free to challenge people. Sometimes I'll bring guests on the show that I know I'll completely disagree with, and just for the fun of challenging them and having a discussion around that. And which I did recently with somebody, had an episode with Jake Dunlap that runs a company called Scaled, their sales consultancy. And we disagree about several things. Nicely disagree, but we still disagree. He's one of these people who doesn't believe relationships are that important in sales. And I am 180 degrees opposite from that. And so we had a great sort of debate back and forth. So I brought him on knowing that would be the case. I
even heard that with your podcast with Keenan a little bit, because he said it doesn't matter if people like you at all. In fact, he said, screw it, as long as you are fixing their problem with the problem-centric selling and bridging that gap for them, it doesn't matter. They could hate you, but as long as they're buying from you, because you're solving that. So there was definitely that.
Well, and just to be clear to your listeners, he's completely wrong. as much as I like Keenan, he's completely wrong. And ironic that one of the more likable people you ever meet says that, right? Because likability is a huge component of his appeal. Just FYI. It's okay to have different points of view. And really what we need in the sales world in general, in the business, is more conversations like that, where people can honestly disagree and have a good conversation about that and provide different points of view and different perspectives. Because yeah, I respect the fact that even though I think he's completely wrong, I respect the fact that he has that point of view. There is no one way to sell. And this is, the thing that has driven me crazy since I started in sales is this idea that here's this methodology, Sandler or spin or whatever. And that's how you sell. It's like, no, I couldn't identify what my style or my methodology is. I'm a mix of everything I've learned through my career. And I acknowledge that when I put out content that it's not going to be for everybody. And that's fine. I just hope people find something from it. Because they're building their own version of what they're all. What I tell people is write your own sales book. I don't mean it literally, but what's your philosophy, right? What's your method? It's really helpful if you take the time to sort of deconstruct that. Even if you just write on 2 pieces of paper. What do you think? What do you believe in sales? What are the principles you're trying to follow? What are the philosophies you're trying to follow? How do you feel about the importance of relationships or connections or likability? Again, which is science is completely against what Keenan says about that. Hey, understand what works for you, and that's really what you should be trying to do in your career is build this version of who you are as yourself. Not, I want to be a clone of somebody else. I might take something from somebody else, but I'm going to succeed by being me.
Totally. I love that. And that individual approach, I think, allows other people to learn, you to learn from other, like, I may not agree with you. I may not, agree with, you may not agree with Keenan, but maybe there's something that he says that, if you're thinking and listening and asking some of those questions, it's going to move you along in your own thought process. And that's where new ideas came from. I mean,
and take those things and experiment with them. Yeah. If you don't think likability is important, as I've said, there've been lots of asses who have succeeded in sales, right? I mean, it's not the norm, but some people that are just bad people, they've managed to succeed. But it costs you nothing to be a good person, and it will work to your advantage. But again, everybody has their thing.
I wanted to ping back really quick.
Sure.
You mentioned that you like to control the show. It's your show, like you said. And so sometimes, if the guest will come on and they'll give you a list of questions they want to be asked, you'll say, nope, not doing that. Have you ever got into, had an issue with that? Have you ever had a guest say, okay, fine, you're not going to take my questions, I'm not going to come on?
Yeah, and that's fine. It works that way. And it works with people that ask me to provide the questions ahead of time. And I'll say, no, I don't do that either. Because I want spontaneous conversations. I'm not going to ask gotcha questions, right? I'm not, tabloid journalist. I don't, hey, I've got a picture of you and so on. What do you think of that? No, I'm going to talk about their book. I'm going to talk about something they wrote on LinkedIn. I'm going to talk about something that's out there publicly already. And that seems like pretty fair game. And they should be able to stand up and defend it. I mean, I've had guests on the show that have written books and they come on, we talk about the books and they can't defend the central theses of their book. It's like, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a big problem.
It's not my problem. Why should I have warned you ahead of time with the questions? I'm just asking questions about a book you just wrote.
Yeah.
So really, I've had some, big name guests, not what I consider big name guests in the sales world, just, not want to play because I wasn't willing to play with them. And that's fine.
Totally. I feel like if we want to really do a proper job on talking about podcasting, we might have to have you come back on in another episode.
That'd be great. I love it.
Do something like that. But I do want to ask.
Sure.
You don't get to 870 episodes on accident. And so could you tell me a little bit of what went into not just the longevity, but your journey into getting there? Because I thought about it, even if you're doing 2 podcasts per week, and just really focusing on that, that takes quite a while to put out that much content.
Yeah.
To walk me through that process a little bit in, whatever detail you want to do. And then we'll have to do another episode. Sure. I'm curious.
I was motivated by listening to a talk by John Lee Dumas, who has got the Entrepreneur on Fire. And he was at a user conference for Infusionsoft back in 2015. And I was just something that sort of struck my interest. I don't know why I never really thought of it, hadn't thought of it prior to that, but just seemed like such a great way to A, create content, B, meet and talk with a lot of really interesting people, and continue my own journey of learning about what's happening and staying current with what's happening in the sales world. And so I inspired by that, I went home, and actually my son helped me, who has basically been my partner throughout building the podcast. Is Yeah, I think we probably started recording episodes within like 30 days. I had this vision. We were going to start like Dumas. We're going to start off I think we started as a 3-day a week podcast, and pretty quickly we went to 5 days a week because we had a lot of people wanted to be on the show, and because I knew a lot of people, and it's easy to sort of get people on. But you just sort of got into a rhythm of, we record them 1 day a week, just like we do now. So do 5 interviews, and it took me at least a full day, not including reading books, to prepare for them. So I was able to still just sort of multitask. And I said, my son took on all the production burden and post-production work and the like. And once I got started, it was just so much fun, right? And I was meeting so many interesting people. And I said, I was learning a ton myself, things that would have been harder to learn about things that were happening in the sales and marketing world that perhaps if I hadn't done that, didn't have access to these guests to talk to. And then, we got in this rhythm, and eventually we started slowing down to 3 days a week, because sort of the feedback we were getting from people is, love your podcast. There's just too much content. I can't consume it all. And I started hearing that enough that I said, okay, well, no reason to put out things that people are having a hard time investing time to listen to. And it just seems like in the sales world, daily podcasts just weren't that important. So we scaled back to 3 days a week, and then eventually we sort of the last year before the podcast was acquired, we back to 1 day a week, which was fine. But I sort of missed doing a little bit more. So after we were acquired a year ago by RingDNA, we decided to boost it back up to 3. So you just sort of get into a rhythm, and it's been fantastic working with my son, who's, like I said, really been the brains behind the operation in many respects. And it's gotten easier because since we have a show that is highly thought of, people want to be on it. So I don't have to spend time recruiting guests, which takes a lot of the effort out of it as well. So we have, right now we're recording this in January, and our recording schedule's booked out almost to the end of April. Wow. A little too far in advance, but I mean, we do have this inbound demand, which is good. And so we can be a little picky and selective about who we want to have on the show. But we'll see, whether we continue at this pace or switch it up, because it's sort of fun to change it up a little bit. And maybe the first 3 years we were a little more, we did sales, but also a lot of entrepreneurial type things, journeys, stories about entrepreneurs. Over the last year or two, we'd gotten less of that, more specifically on sales and sales technologies and so on. So I can see us sometime this year, sort of not necessarily completely pivoting, but changing the direction a little bit and bringing some fresh stuff to the show.
Absolutely. Did you monetize the channel prior to being acquired?
So we had sponsorships. Okay. We weren't hugely consistent with that, but it did more than paid for itself with the sponsorship. We didn't, we did monetize in the sense that, it was helped to get business, speaking engagements and other parts of my business at that time. But it's certainly possible to be more aggressive doing that. And then, we monetized it by selling it, which was unexpected, but been great. And now we've got a whole team of people that are interested in it internally, and we rebranded the podcast, and it's continued to serve its upward trajectory. So having that support from the team at RingDNA has been fantastic.
That's awesome. Well, Andy, I want to just thank you for coming on. This has been so fun to dig into your world. I had no idea about the podcast at all. I didn't really have any idea about you, and us being able to connect over LinkedIn and just kind of me dig into your story a little bit has been inspiring. And I am definitely looking forward to hearing more about the podcast side of things.
Sure. Let's do it again.
I'm dreadfully curious just how you built it. And, I'm building a podcast team around this show and around another show as well. And
cool.
So I'd love to get your insight. But anyway, everyone will have to join us for part 2 of this. Andy, if they're looking to connect, if anyone watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, wants to connect with you more, where can they find you?
Well, connect with me on LinkedIn and the usual preamble, Real Andy Paul. And then, check out the podcast, on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you check out podcasts, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul. And you can dig into our entire archive of 870 episodes. And stay tuned this year. We got some, interesting things coming.
I'm excited. Well, Andy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To everyone listening, watching on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed, and we'll see you in the next show.